Well, it's actually been kind of delicious watching all of the IP people get triggered after the Oracle v. Google decision. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, check out the archives of the podcast because I covered this while it was going on. Basically, what happened is that Oracle decided all of a sudden that APIs should be considered a form of copyrightable computer. And as we'll talk about, no one had ever done that before, but Google had used the Java API for Android, and then, of course, they made a whole bunch of money from it, and so, the Oracle kind of went, we want that money! That's really what this is about. They're going to try to make it about everything else in the world, but that's really what it's about, so... We have this, what is this crazy website called? IPWatchdog.com. Wow, don't you feel so much better knowing that there are IP watchdogs out there to try and make the world safe for intellectual property? And whoever this guy is, Gene Quinn, the upshot of Google v. Oracle, an absurd ruling will lead to absurd results. Yeah, we'll see what he has to say here. Yeah, so he attributes this to the whims and fancy of an arbitrary Supreme Court. Yeah, why do I have a feeling that he wouldn't have said that if the court had ruled the other way? By the way, before we go on, it's important to understand that the court did not do what sane people were wanting them to do and say that APIs cannot be copyrighted, because they can't. That's just ridiculous. But they did say that Google's use of it was fair use. Let me see if I can explain this. Hang on. All right. This, I think, is a good... I use this analogy on the website. So this is sheet music. All right. So you have notes and staff lines and everything else here. And if you know how to read sheet music, you can look at this and learn how to play, was it Johann Strauss's Blue Danube? Yep, that's what this is. I didn't even look at what I grabbed. It's just what was on the piano at the time. But yeah, and if you know about quarter notes and eighth notes and 16th notes and key signatures and time signatures and everything else, you can do that. Well, an API is kind of like sheet music. It's all of the methods that are used for a composer to write sheet music so that a musician will be able to play it without the two of them having to get together and work about it. It's all about interoperability. Well, imagine someone coming along and saying, and this will be Oracle, that you can copyright not a particular composition, but the concept of sheet music. That's basically what they're saying. So this guy says, the court ruled that Google's intentional copying of 11,500 lines of computer code from Oracle was a fair use despite the fact that Google made many tens of billions of dollars in the process. Okay, that has nothing to do with it. If you do something and it's absolutely fair use, and then you make money from it, it doesn't all of a sudden stop being fair use. That's just ridiculous. So the record showed that Google consciously chose to copy rather than independently create because programmers were already familiar with the 11,500 lines of code they wanted to take. Yeah, they wanted to use sheet music the way musicians have understood it for centuries, rather than try and come up with their own notation that musicians would then have to learn, because they wanted people to write apps using Java. And the whole point of Java, by the way, is interoperability. That's why Sun Microsystems made it up and originally. We'll get more into that a little later. But yeah, Java is supposed to be an open standard. And here Oracle is going back on that. So yeah, and the code that they want, the code that they want to create is the API. And that's nothing that had ever really been considered computer code before. Oracle came up with this term declaring code. And I covered this in Thomas's Dissent, how he just keeps using declaring code instead of API, which is what programmers actually call it. Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy because see if you can find anything outside of this case where programmers are actually using the term declaring code. Because I've never heard of it. I've asked other programmers, they've never heard of it. It really just looks like something that's been made up specifically for this case so they can call APIs computer code. So let's see, he goes on. Also up here, I don't know why he brought in Newton's third law. I don't know what that has to do with anything. I guess he's trying to make himself look all smart, but I don't know. It says, yes, the court attempted to create a distinction between declaring code and implementing code. No, the distinction is between code and API, and it's been there. The concept of an API actually goes back to the 40s. What was that computer? The EDSAC? It was like the first, I think it was the first modularly programmable computer. And they had this idea there of an API. They didn't call it that. The term API, I think, came up in the 60s, but the concept has been around for all this time. Yeah, so it's just ridiculous for them to now all of a sudden say, you know, that it's all of a sudden computer code. I don't know. But as Bob Zeidman explained, there are no such technical terms, and the court offered no useful definitions. But those were terms that your side came up with. Oracle made up those terms. The pro-IP people, the ones who wanted APIs to be copyrighted, came up with those terms to try and pull the idea of an API over into computer codes. So... yeah, I mean, he even comes out, this is why, this first one is really just for the lulz. This guy, he just comes right out and admits that it's made up terms, but he's trying to pretend that the other side made up the terms, and it's this made up distinction that didn't exist before. No. That's Oracle that's doing that. That is Oracle, so. The better question the Supreme Court should have asked is, why shouldn't Google be required to acquire the rights to the original code they wanted to take? Yeah. Google could have still written their own original code, but if they had done their own thing, again, it wouldn't have, interoperable. He talks about interoperability here. Interoperability is definitely something we should all want, but at what cost? At what cost? Well, let me tell you something, Mr. IP expert. Oracle did exactly the same with SQL. IBM created SQL for databases to have a common database language. It's an API. Oracle's big thing has always been databases. They were pretty much the kings of relational databases for a long time, probably still are. And they did that by copying SQL from IBM without paying IBM any royalties. But now they're complaining that Google did to them what they did to IBM. They've been operating all this time in an industry that is considered APIs uncopyrightable. And now all of a sudden they're taking issue with it. Companies must now keep their software code secret and never release code to the public unless they're willing to give up all rights in it. No, just the API. Just the instructions. Just the concept of sheet music. You don't have to keep your music secret. But everyone already knows how to make sheet music. So, yeah. And now he's all whining that software is the red-headed stepchild of innovation. Oh my God, this guy, I cannot write satire like this. Check this out. It does continue the trend of making software less protectable in the United States. The Supreme Court is an increasingly autocratic tribunal that, survey says, legislates from the bench on matters of intellectual property. Wow, he is whining exactly like a pro-lifer. I can't write satire like this. I really can't. You know, if I were going to do like an onion-esque, imitation of someone on his side, I couldn't do it like this. All right. The Supreme Court is doing everything in their power to make software the red-headed stepchild of the innovation world in the United States. Why? So a handful of very powerful and extraordinarily rich companies can copy without creating, which is exactly what happened when Google cut and pasted Oracle's code. But isn't that what happened when Google cut and pasted SQL from IBM? And if they were doing everything in their power, why did they only declare it fair use instead of doing the sensible thing and say, no, of course this can't be copyrighted. What are you, crazy? So, truthfully, the Supreme Court in Google v. Oracle will do far more damage to other copyrighted works because of the long-lasting damage it will inflict on the doctrine of fair use. So saying that it's fair use is somehow damaging to fair use. Yeah. There was really only protection for software against literal cut and pasting, and now that is fair use, thanks to the ruling earlier this week, so copyrights in software were already weak, now they are non-existent. Oh, if only that were the case. Because frankly, the idea that you can copyright software is ridiculous. Software is math. And trying to claim ownership of math is patently absurd. No pun intended, patent, Talking about copyrights, not patents, but still. I'll take the pun. I'll take it. How courts will interpret this decision could be quite scary. Yeah, if you notice that he hasn't once used the term API, have you noticed that? Just like Thomas in his dissent. They don't seem to want to talk about actual APIs, which is what this was really about. How courts will interpret this decision could be quite scary. Yes, the court did find the Google used to be transformative, which seemed to turn the four-factor statutory fair use into a single-factor test. It's never been the case that you had to meet all four factors to pass the test. You just had to meet one or more of them to a significant degree. But no rational person could realistically believe that the Google cut and paste copying of the code was transformative. No, they had only just done something with it that no one in history had ever done before, but that's not transformative, apparently. The Supreme Court ruled Google's copying transformative because Java is used on desktop and laptop computers, and Google used the code on a smartphone. Way to either not read the decision or lie through your eye teeth. Because Android being on a smartphone was not the criteria they used. It's the fact that it was an API. Those little letters that you don't want to say for some reason. Why is that, huh? Why is it? I forgot your name. Why is your name Mr. IP Freely, whatever your name is? I don't feel like scrolling up and checking it again. All right, and down to there he is. Gene Quinn. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Like I care. Still don't care. What we know today is it is a fair use to make tens of billions of dollars having engaged in cut and paste copying as long as you change the platform for distribution. Yes, you can use an API. And you can make lots of money doing it. Just like Oracle did with SQL. So I have to keep bringing it up, but it really seems like an important point. And this was after Google didn't acquire Java until after Sun Microsystems, who had owned it previously, they had created it. They had already released it as GPL anyway. So I don't know what the problem is. And this is how you know the Supreme Court got it wrong. The majority ruling leads to absurd results. Only absurd results I'm seeing are coming from you, Sunshine. Now fair use exists, even where the copyright owner's market has been completely destroyed. Yes, Google completely destroyed a market for Oracle that hadn't even existed. I don't know. The snowflakes will do whatever they can. Anything they can to try and, to try and just piss and moan about all the money they want. No, I want money. I want money I didn't earn. So, all right, let's go to a more serious one. Oracle's lead lawyer in the case, what's her name there? It is Annette Hurst, led the case on the Oracle side, posted her thoughts to LinkedIn. Somehow, this ruling means the death of free software, and more specifically, it killed the GPL, which stands for General Public License, even though at the trial one witness kept calling it the GNU Public License. No, it's the General Public License. If you can't even get the name of the license right, why should we listen to you? So she either doesn't understand that software and APIs are not the same thing, or she just doesn't care. And so this is from her LinkedIn article. The developer community may be celebrating today what it perceives as a victory in Oracle v. Google. Google won a verdict that an unauthorized, commercial, competitive, harmful use of software in billions of products is fair use. And good for them. They should have gone further and said it wasn't copyrightable at all. But check this out. No copyright expert would have ever predicted such a use would be considered fair. Yeah, except for all the ones that did. And all the ones that have just assumed that it was since the 1940s. Before celebrating, developers should take a closer look. Not only will creators everywhere suffer from this decision if it remains intact, but the free software movement itself now faces substantial jeopardy. Oh yes, we're in jeopardy. I'll take moronic arguments for 400, Alex. Yeah. And I believe this is Mike Masnick. I should have checked. Yeah, Mike Masnick. Comes in and says, except of course, tons of copyright experts predicted exactly this result, and many more argue that API should not be subject to copyright at all. Mentions Paul Samuelson, writing extensively about the case, why API should not be covered by copyright, and why basically every other court has agreed, as well as why, even if it is covered, it's fair use. And that second part is just the part that the Supreme Court did. It's weird for Hurst to take a position that actually seems at odds with a huge number of copyright experts, and then state that none of them would take the position that many did. But I guess that's what you got to do when you got nothing to back up your side of the case. Right. While we don't know what ultimately swayed the jury, while the fact that they took like extensive notes and really studied it, this is the one where the Judge Alsop, actually taught himself how to code. He actually learned Java so he could understand the issues, and he and the jury said, yeah, of course the APIs are going to be fair use. If you understand what an API is, and if you've actually programmed and used it before, yeah, you're going to think it's ridiculous that someone could try and copyright it. But Google's narrative boiled down to this: because the Java APIs have been open, any use of them was justified and all licensing restrictions should be discarded. In other words, if you offer your software on an open and free basis, any use is fair use. Well, yeah, because that's kind of the purpose of opening up. If that narrative becomes the law of the land, you can kiss the GPL goodbye. She doesn't say why, but no one was arguing, as Masnick points out, that any software that is described as free and open, or that is using the GPL, means that any use is fair. Again, she's conflating APIs with actual software. There was a lot of that. That was basically Oracle's whole. Yes, I am really low on hydration today. We've actually got a fire warning because our humidity dropped below 25%, which basically never happens. Normally in North Carolina, we're dealing with 90% humidity. And just really low today. So pardon all the drinking, but he talks about APIs being a structure, a table of contents, effectively. I like my analogy of sheet music more because I think even if you're not a musician, you can understand, okay, all those weird little spots on the page and everything tell a musician how to play a piece of music. And although you can copyright a piece of music, actually saying that you have to license that method of communication from someone, that's crazy. I mean, if nothing else, it's a blatant free speech violation. Because sheet music is how musicians talk to each other. And so trying to stop that would mean that they can't speak. Same thing with an API. That's what an API is. So I kind of like my analogy better than his, but anyway. No business trying to commercialize software with any element of open software can afford to ignore this verdict. Dual licensing models are very common and have long depended upon a delicate balance between free use and commercial use. Royalties from licensed commercial distribution fuel continued development and innovation of an open and free option. The balance depends upon adherence to the license restrictions in the open and free option. The jury's verdict suggests that such restrictions are now meaningless since disregarding them is a matter of claiming fair use. And Masnick says this is simply not true. The case revolved around the fact that the API in its declaring code, he puts it in quotes, because again, I cannot find anyone using this term declaring code outside of this case. As far as I can see, Oracle just made it up. They made it up to make it seem like APIs were just like the regular code. And then we just saw the other guys say that it was a false distinction from the other side. Crazy. That the API and its declaring code are fundamentally different from the actual source code within the operating system. Part of the reason why the use of the same API is considered fair use is because of that very nature of it. The API is more functional. Yeah, I've talked about this before. It's kind of like how you can't copyright a typeface, because a typeface is letters and numbers, and that's how humans communicate. And so because it has that function, because it has that utility, you can't copyright. Now, if on files on your computer, they probably are copyrighted because they contain hinting, and hinting is computer code, and you can copyright the computer code. But the typeface itself, you could duplicate the design all you want, and there's no protection for that. It's only if you don't understand that the two things are different that this ruling leads to the problems that Hurst describes. A case with the same facts, but where straight-up source code was copied, would have a much tougher uphill battle on the fair use front. So Hurst says, developers beware. You may think you got a win yesterday, but it's time to think about more than your desires to copy freely when you sit down at a keyboard. Masnick says that this shows a rather unfortunate ignorance of how coding works. It's not about a desire to copy freely, it's about building amazing and innovative services and making use of APIs to increase interoperability, which increases value. Copying an API structure is also just much more about making developers comfortable in using new environments. Like how Oracle copied SQL from IBM, just like what I've been saying. Because lots of people understood select from where, and it made little sense to create a relational database that didn't use that structure. It's not about copying freely, it's about interoperability. And really, the idea that an Oracle lawyer is concerned about the future of the GPL is fairly laughable. Thankfully, many people have weighed in the comments, including plenty who are quite familiar with the GPL and software development, to explain to Hurst why she's wrong. Somehow, I think she has some fairly strong reasons to ignore these responses. And I think I'm dropping frames for some reason. Yeah. I've got a couple more things to cover. I'm going to do an edit because I want to close out of OPS and bring it back up and make sure everything's good. But what I want to get into, let me go ahead and go over to it, is the Free Software Foundation from way back in 2010 So this isn't going to be some after the fact, weirdo kind where you basically they're not just coming up with this after the fact. This is what they've been saying all along. All along, this ruling has been about free software. To say that the ruling is going against free software is ridiculous. But let me fix this little problem I'm having, and I'll be right back. Okay. So this is the response to Oracle v. Google and the threat of software patents from 11 years ago. Well, not quite 11, 10 and a half, something like that. But the Free Software Foundation, the guys themselves, and this is Brett Smith in particular, saying, though it took longer than we would have liked, Sun Microsystems ultimately did the right thing by the free software community when it released Java under the GPL in 2006. We welcomed that when it was announced. Java had long been a popular programming language. We were hoping the change would make it a language with first-class support in the software community. Now, Oracle's lawsuit threatens to undo all of that, all of the goodwill that's been built up in the years since. Programmers will justifiably steer clear of Java when they stand to be sued if they use it in some way that Oracle doesn't like. One of the great benefits of free software is that it allows programs to be combined in ways that none of the original developers would have anticipated to create something new and exciting. Oracle is signaling to the world that they intend to limit everybody's ability to do this with Java, and that's unjustifiable. So, they say an aggressive infringement suit over software patents is a clear attack against someone's freedom to use, share, modify, and redistribute software, freedoms that everyone should always have. Oracle now seeks to take these rights away, not just from Google, but from all Android users. Because remember, it's not just about Google making Android. It's about if you decide that if you want to write apps on Android, you need to do it in Java using the Java APIs so that you can interoperate. But if Oracle had won this ruling, you would have had to get a license to be able to do that. Or at least they could have demanded it. So, more hypocrisy. Oracle was previously opposed to software patents. That the company is now using patents as its primary weapon to attack competitors is a stunning reversal of that position. And so he mentions a statement Oracle made back in 1994, which says, patent law provides to inventors an exclusive right to new technology in return for publication of the technology. This is not appropriate for industries such as software development, in which innovations occur rapidly, can be made without a substantial capital investment, and tend to be creative combinations of previously known technologies or techniques. And then back to the Free Software Foundation. Oracle once claimed that it only sought software patents for defensive purposes. We've talked about defensive patents before and why people get those. And it's a real thing. It's a necessary thing in a lot of cases, but this is kind of how they get you on the slippery slope. It was once for defensive purposes. Now it is using them to proactively attack free software. It's not the first company to make this about face, and unfortunately, it probably won't be the last. Today, Google claims they need software patents for defensive purposes, but the reality is that programmers will only truly be safe from software patents when everybody is forced to disarm. Yeah. No software patents, no copyrights. The ruling is a good thing. The only bad thing about the ruling is it didn't go far enough. And that's really it. So it went through the court. And like I said, Judge Alsup went out of his way to understand the issues, as did the jury. They were amazing. I think they were a model for juries in the future on technological issues. And of course, they don't exactly stack the jury with experts. So, the jury had all sorts of complicated issues to understand. They filled each of them filled, I think, like 4 or 5 notebooks, with stuff they were just writing down. They had asked the judge if they could take their notebooks home and study them over the weekend, and he said yes. They really, really went out of their way to make the best judgment they could. They found for Google. And then the Court of Appeals just are completely ignorant of all these issues. They reversed it and went for Oracle. So this is before the Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeals reversal and gave the judgment back to Google. So this is the Free Software Foundation responding to that Court of Appeals. The Federal Circuit has ruled in Oracle's favor, which has reintroduced confusion and uncertainty on a user's freedom to use APIs. Judge Alsop's decision originally clarified Google's right to continue unabated in its distribution and development of the Android development libraries that were similar to Java's. The Federal Circuit has now ruled in Oracle's favor, which has reintroduced confusion and uncertainty on the issue. And when they were waiting for Alsop's verdict, the FSF had issued a statement. Were it grounded in reality, Oracle's claim that copyright law gives them proprietary control over any software that uses a particular functional API would be terrible for free software and programmers everywhere. It is an unethical and greedy interpretation created with the express purpose of subjugating as many computer users as possible, and is particularly bad in this context because it comes at a time when the sun has barely set on the free software community's celebration of Java as a language newly suitable for use in the free. And he's referring to Sun making it available under the GPL. Fortunately, the claim is not yet reality, and we hope Judge Alsop will keep it that way. So he did, but then the appeals court reversed it. And so the FSF now sincerely hopes for the next best thing to Alsop's original ruling that Google is successful in its fair use defense, and it was at the Supreme Court. So, yep, the Free Software Foundation is saying the exact opposite of what that stupid Hearst woman was saying. It'll be the death of free software. It's the only way to preserve free software. So, one more. This is kind of an important one. Because I've been saying all this time that we've been acting for, 60, 70, 80 years since the 40s that, and certainly since the 60s, that APIs weren't copyrightable. So here's another one from 2012, 9 years ago, or a little less than 9. Whoever thought APIs were copyrightable anyway? This was a completely new out of the blue thing that they're trying to copyright an API. And, who is this? Bradley Kuhn says, the API and the implementation of that API are different. Frankly, in the free software community, everyone always assumed APIs themselves weren't copyrightable. The whole idea of a clean room implementation of something centers around the idea that the APIs aren't copyrighted. GNU itself, and this is also true of Linux and FreeBSD and a bunch of others, depends on the fact that Unix's APIs weren't copyrighted, just the code that AT&T wrote to implement Unix. Yeah, really dehydrated today. I'm just about done, though. Those who oppose copyleft keep saying that this decision eviscerates copyleft. I don't really see how it does. For all this time, free software advocates have always re-implemented proprietary APIs from scratch. Even copylefted projects like Wine depend on this after all. But be careful here. Many developers use the phrase API to mean different things. Implementations of an API are still copyrightable, just like they always have been. Distribution of other people's code that implement APIs still requires their permission. What isn't copyrightable is general concepts like, to make things work, you need a function that returns an int and takes a string as an argument, and that function must be called foo. That's what they've been talking about, the declaring code, the sheet music of the programming world. Yeah. That's what this is. That's what we're talking about. So, yeah, they're all up in arms. They're all butthurt. They're all triggered. But free software people, just understand, they're lying to you. They're trying to manipulate you. They don't care about free software. They never did. They wouldn't have done this in the beginning if they were. Not only did we need the ruling that it was fair use. We need a ruling that it's just not, APIs just aren't copyrightable at all. And hopefully that'll happen, but we shall see. Because if it goes the other way, basically there goes the whole programming world. There goes the whole thing. There's no more Linux. There's no more BSD. There's no more anything's done for interoperability unless they go to some big corporation. They go to AT&T and buy this really expensive license just to keep Linux going. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, thank you all for watching. Comments for the Common God, shares for the Share Throne. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, and the bell. Those are your rituals to the gods of the YouTube algorithm that can hopefully get this blessings of high search rankings and related videos to get past the shadow banning. And of course, donate.bogosity.tv. All sorts of ways to donate. PayPal, cryptocurrency. I'm forever updating it with new ways. There's the AnyPay protocol, which didn't quite work as well as I had hoped with the QR thing, but you can do that over at donate.bogosity.tv now. And they've come up with some other ways that they're working on to try and make it easier just to donate a few pennies in crypto, if that's all you can do. Every little bit helps. And of course, you can become a subscriber at Patreon or Subscribestar. Even for just $1 a month, you can get videos like these early. You can join in the live streams, things like that. And there are higher tiers where you can do things like participate in the AMA or give me a shout out or whatever. So, thank you for watching. And as always, it's just so important in software, as in everywhere else in life, to stay strong and be free.